Good morning again. Thank you for coming. This is the Feminisms of Color and the Secular Movement panel, and I'm honored to have a distinguished panel of activists, educators, writers, and all-arounds from the secular movement, perhaps still maybe Maggie Ardiente from the American Humanist Association, Heina Dadabhoy from Free Thought Blogs, AJ Word / Deanna Williford from Secular Sistahs, straight out of DC, Deanna Adams from Musings on the Limb, based here in Houston. And I'm going to get more into their bios as we proceed, but I just want to give a brief overview about what's at stake here if we're talking about feminisms of color. We want to talk candidly about feminism and its discontents, because when women of color and white women talk about feminism, write about feminism, live feminism, organize around feminism, there are very different histories and cultural trajectories that are at play. So from the clashes between African American activists and white activists during the abolitionist movement in the 19th century to second wave feminism's disavowal of lesbian African American feminists who spearheaded the Combahee Collective, to third and fourth wave feminist activists who have clashed on issues of anti-racist, anti-capitalist, LGBTQ organizing, and reproductive justice organizing. These schisms in the American feminist movement are long and deep. And similarly, if we're talking about the white-dominated secular feminist contentions, many of them have been largely ignorant of, if not resistant to, the culturally specific lived experiences and social histories of women of color. And so I've asked the panelists to reflect on the question, namely, what are some of the primary challenges feminists of color face in the white-dominated secular movement, and how does your coalition building work outside of the movement intersect with secular, humanist, and or atheist issues?
I want to talk a little bit about my own perspective, being raised Filipino Catholic, but also from an organizational perspective, having worked for the American Humanist Association for 10 years. I think that they're sort of intertwined in many ways. And I'll talk about two specific challenges for me that I think face feminists of color in the secular movement, and some ideas on how we can overcome them. So it almost goes without saying that it's very rare to be a Filipino atheist. There are 2.5 million Filipino Americans in the United States. We are the second largest Asian American group, and 65% are Catholic. But though Asian Americans are more likely than the general public to be unaffiliated with any religion, that's 25% actually identify as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. Among Filipinos, only 1% identify as atheist or agnostic, and only 8% identify as nothing in particular. And I think this is obvious to a lot of people. Being Filipino and Filipino culture and Catholicism are significantly linked. As immigrants, coming to the United States, religion was essentially your only community, and so this is how we were able to form alliances, but also survive in a new country. And though I was taught in the stereotypical Asian way of working hard and getting straight A's in school, I was also to understand my place as a woman. To work too hard could intimidate my future husband, and that working hard in school largely referred only to me and my 4 sisters, and not my 2 brothers. My brother's got preferential treatment over all of us. He was able to go to friends' houses and go to sleepovers and stay out late and even date. We were not allowed to date because, as my father always said, boys can take care of themselves. The other challenge I've experienced in battle is particularly battling this notion that humanists should replace the word feminist, and that being a humanist absolves a person from being sexist or racist. I know I don't have to say this to this group. Thank you. I say this to other people and they're like, what? First, I want to make it very clear, humanists, by the AHA's definition of humanism, are feminists. Okay? We're proud to use the word feminist, happy to use the word feminist, happy to stand in solidarity with people who fight in the feminist movement. So largely our battles are mostly online. Luckily, they're not really internally with members. Most of our members agree with us on this. But men's rights activists and people who are trying to use the word humanism to replace feminism. They're saying it's a better word than feminism, and we do not agree with this. I want to go on record for that. Though humanism is a compassionate, reason-based philosophy, it's a sad truth to face that to some humanists or atheists, or free thinkers or rationalists, Black lives do not matter, that the goals of feminism do not matter, that the AHA should not get involved in anything other than the separation of religion and government. This applies to other secular organizations as well. And I'm here to say that those people are wrong. And the best way for us to overcome these challenges is to create opportunities for women of color and people of color to lead secular organizations and make social justice a priority, to dialogue with current secular leaders to make social justice a priority, and to fight against anyone who would attempt to hijack the word humanism to mean anything other than compassion, equality, and justice for all. Thank you very much.
Being really into religion, being really into writing and things like that, and aspiring to be, a Muslim writer and speaker, then I realized, oh, woman, that's not super allowed or permitted. I mean, there are a lot of Muslim female writers and activists and things like that, but they're constrained by certain rules and norms and things like that. And so, I journeyed out of Islam, which is its own talk, and there's multiple versions of it online. So if you're curious, I won't get into it because then I'll just eat up all the time. But once I got out of Islam, I thought, this itch I have to write and speak and be out there and talk about my story and talk about the complexities of it. Clearly, the secular movement, not being religious, will let me. What reason do they have to not want me to do this thing? And then I found out that sexism was not limited to religious people. And it sounds hilarious right now, but 10 years ago when I first became an atheist, that didn't occur to me. It never occurred to me that, secular movements would have this ingrained sexism. And then I found out not only was it sexism based on secular reasons, it was based on what they thought were legitimate biological reasons. The BS evolutionary psychology just so stories, as Rebecca Watson calls it. She did talk at Skepticon about it, where they say, girls like pink and boys like blue, and it's because of berry picking. They would just completely fabricate bad science, almost like, a more gendered version of eugenics in certain ways. And that's another thing, too, that I remember thinking about. I remember thinking that, as people who love science in this movement, with their I Ethic Love Science pages and their posts of pictures of galaxies and their obsessions with certain biologists with bad Twitters that I will name, you would think that they would care about it. We all had fun last week, I know. But, you would think that they would care about things like the history of eugenics. You think they would care about, the parts of science that have been used and manipulated for white supremacist reasons, but instead they just want to ignore it. I had someone, I remember at my first Skepticon, I was walking over for dinner, as you do, and this person that I just met was laughing and saying, oh, I know this Black lady who's really skeptical of medicine, ha ha, why would she be skeptical of science? And I just looked at him like, where have you lived? What planet do you live on? And that's when you figure out really the realities are different in so many ways. A lot of these secular groups and things like that, people in it who don't have intersectional concerns, they think you can check part of your identities at the door. They think that you can leave your brownness and your feminist behind the door and you come in and you're just an atheist and you just care about church-state separation. That's the thing, right? That's the holy grail of activism, apparently. And everything else can just, screw itself. But that's where sort of I come in, where, I don't officially work with any orgs, although, I flirt with a lot of them, I do work for certain ones. But that's where I feel like my role comes in, and I basically try to get in there and get people to listen. And it's sometimes a thankless slog, and sometimes I wonder why I bother at all, but then you see changes actually happening. You see movements actually happening. But I think people are finally, to some extent, let's not be too optimistic here, but I think people are finally starting to understand that we can't leave parts of ourselves behind. That we are whole people and we bring in everything. And every single thing that affects us affects other things. So, being a person of color is one thing, being a woman is one thing, being a woman of color is another thing. And then being an ex-Muslim is yet another thing. And that's kind of where I face some challenges in working with the secular movement, because everyone in the secular movement, you say the word ex-Muslim and suddenly they all are fawning over you. Oh, you're so brave. Oh, good job. You know, A plus for deconverting. You know, okay. And then they don't want to believe me though when I tell them that my most credible threats of violence do not come from Muslims. They come from fellow atheists.
Yeah.
You know, someone in Yemen getting mad at me on Twitter and telling me that he's going to set me straight with his penis is one thing. But somebody in the United States who attends the same groups as me, who goes to the same atheist conferences as me, threatening me, that's scary. That actually is going to have an effect on me. And then, you know, they want to ignore certain parts of it. You know, they want to use Muslims as ex-Muslims as tokens. To say, look how much worse sexism is over here. We're so much better than those horrible brown men. And it's abysmal. And I think a lot of ex-Muslims, like when we first get on the scene, are excited by all the attention we get and then suddenly become disenchanted by it. Because we don't want to be their shield. We don't want to be what they use to show how great they are. Because, you know, you have a certain kind of sexism here and a certain kind of sexism here, but it's all sexism. And, you know, when I say the word LGBT Muslim, everyone thinks it's hilarious to laugh and say, isn't that an oxymoron? You know, I can do a talk on it. I can talk about groups that are actually all about LGBT Muslims and progressiveness, and yet everyone just wants to make a joke about how that can't exist. And, you know, at some point it just stops being funny. It starts being erasure. And so that's something I've been working on a great deal.
So I am co-founder of Secular Sistahs. We are a completely grassroots organization, just really, just me and two other ladies just got together and we decided that we wanted to form a group of Black women who were non-religious, skeptic, agnostic, atheists, just because we realized that most sister groups are faith-based. Everything that most Black women do is revolved around God, religion, and for those of us who aren't religious, it can sort of be it can become very isolating and very uncomfortable. So my own personal background, my parents are Baptists, they are from the South. They're not overly religious. I did grow up going to church, but it wasn't anything that was kind of broadly into me. So I think I came out atheist, ironically, when I moved to Houston to pursue my master's in social work. And so I joined the Houston Humanist Meetup with Dawn. And that was very eye-opening for me. For one, I kind of always felt like atheism was a white person thing. And it was something evil and something that had to do with devil worshipism, and I never wanted to actually be involved with. But once I started going online and I joined this group and just started talking to different people, and then and I ended up moving back to DC, and he put me in contact with Black atheists in DC, and that was kind of the catalyst for Secular Sistahs because I met some people, some like-minded people, and it was just great. So from there, you know, I was like, oh, okay, so. As a social worker, you know, we fight for social justice. So all of these things tie together. So it's something that I've always been passionate about. So as far as some challenges, some unforeseen challenges, maybe they were always there and I wasn't privy to them. But I will say underrepresentation, of course. Black women, as far as I know, we still are the #1 religious group in America. So definitely underrepresentation. And where do we have these spaces where we can't talk about being Black and being a feminist and combating sexism? Where does that happen? Because not, in general, when you're with, in a mixed group, you can't always have those conversations. So because there's always a man that's like, well, not all men. Well, not all men do that. Whoa, okay. we're not really, okay, so good for you. Some problematic behaviors that do occur with men. So, and then even with that, I know that with Secular Sistahs, we are strictly for Black women, and we do have allies, and not to say that we don't reach out to other women of color, we don't participate in other, movements with other people, but we really specifically have a specific challenges that only we can kind of talk about, and when we get together, it's just a huge comfort level for people to express themselves. I just want to talk about one time that me and another Secular Sister member went to a CFI meeting, which is the Center for Inquiry. We were the only 2 Black women there. We were at dinner and it was 10 other white people. And the organizer proceeded to engage us in conversation, and of course it led to, we never see Black women, we don't, where are you? You don't believe in God, wow, that's amazing. How does that happen? So, and then she went on to say that she had actually a Black friend, an older lady, who was, I know, it was just the most blatant cliche that you could ever imagine, and it was a little bit surreal, but it happened. And she was like, wow, she's just spicy and she's just, just out. Yeah, she's just one of the most outspoken people that you would ever meet. And so out of respect for this this gathering, knowing me and how I can be, in that moment I didn't speak on it because it was frustrating, but I'm like, this is real life, this is what happens. And this is why you have to have these groups, this is why you have to have Secular Sisters, because, of course, after the meeting, me and, the other lady, we dissected that and talked about it. I was like, wow, this is crazy. So I won't ever be going back to any of those meetings, and it's unfortunate because I'm sure that they probably do need somebody to kind of come in and be that person who is talking about those things. And CFI does have a group that is strictly for women, but again, there is a separation between white feminism and Black feminism. Those two things don't necessarily go together, they don't correlate. There's a huge gap in what happens in those meetings. So that's just one example of a challenge. And just, like the sense of isolation when, as far as so if you call yourself a feminist and you go into these spaces and they're predominantly white, I think that shuts down a lot of Black women from wanting to even wanting to voice their concerns or what they're talking about or what they're there for. It's intimidating. I know that even when I joined the humanist meetup group, there might have been like 4 or 5 Black people, but everybody was white. And so I always have a problem with that. I don't really like going into situations where I was just like one or the only other Black person. And then for Day of Solidarity was really great because then it was like, oh, well, here are all the Black people that are in this community. And it's interesting even then because then it's like, oh, well, that's racist. You all want your own day. So, so just a lot of, and that's just the racial side. That's not even the gender equality and all those other things that come along with being in this community that are challenging. So I guess my one last point as far as like some challenges is also looking at the leaders in the white movement such as Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. I have no idea. I mean, I'm still new to this, so so kind of bear with me too, because I'm still kind of new to atheism and feminism for the most part. In my heart, I was always a feminist. But looking and kind of listening to their speeches and kind of following them and getting and understanding, so they're like a big deal in the atheist community, but they're 2 white men, and I don't know if they ever talk about issues with people of color or racism. I don't think they do. And right. So that's another challenge, I think, as far as being a woman of color, feminist in this movement, looking to see where are your leaders, who are the people that you can follow, like, who can I relate to, because this is not it, really. I've learned some awesome things about atheism, but how does that connect to me as a Black woman? It wasn't there.
I deconverted about 4.5 years ago. I was raised, well, it's a funny story, and I won't go too deep into it right this second, but from the time I was small until about 11 years old, we didn't go to church on Sundays, we went to the beach. I'm from Houston, so we would, my mom would pack the cooler, and, with Cokes and beers and whatever, we'd drive down to Freeport, and we'd stay at the beach all day long on Sundays. When I was about 11, she was, became born again, long story short, and I was kind of the lead in that actually in the family, because my other side of my family, my dad's side was, kind of religious, and so I was always wondering like, I'll go to church, and so when she started to go to church, I was like, oh, I guess this is the thing to do, so, we went to there. So I was raised pretty much from 11 to 18 Baptist, stayed out of church during college, went to the University of Houston, and probably should have stayed out then. I had a professor in the human situation that just flat out asked me, why do you believe in this? I'm like, well, I don't know. But I was 18, so kind of held on to it for a little while, and knew I didn't want to go back to the old, Baptist church. So when I graduated, I went to a prosperity church, and I was there for about 10 years. Then, was married with kids. We wanted to make it a little more personal, so we went to a small church with a lady pastor, non-denominational, but I call it a cult. I mean, she was out there. We couldn't smoke, we couldn't drink, we couldn't curse, we couldn't watch movies, we couldn't, and every part of our life had to revolve around that church and the people in that church. So, left an abusive marriage and an abusive church at the same time. And pretty much this is, that's kind of how I started my deconversion. So, with that being said, we've definitely talked about so far, women of color being unheard, a lot of white atheists feeling that they are above racism and above sexism, they're rational, they don't, they're better than that. The color blindness being an extension of the erasure, So, going past that, on the other side of the coin, and Heina touched on it, I believe, is actually, no, Heina touched on it, being the token. So the other point of that is you don't want to, there's a danger in becoming the spokesperson / token of the person of color in the group or organization. And while it is worthwhile to speak up and bring our specific issues to light, like what we're doing now, like I try to do, I'm currently on the board of Feminists of Houston, and I do try to speak up and bring those issues to light. We have to be careful not to become the black friend, that pats our white counterparts on the head and tells them they're the best allies ever. I had a post, and the people that I work with in HOH are great, and I had a post and I said, I don't give out cookies. I don't give out like cookies. And one of our members was like, I need real cookies. You have to be authentic. You have to be able to bring those issues to light. Know that we're working together. We appreciate that, but sometimes we just need to unpack it. And also, we're not a monolith, so it should be understood that having a variety of feminist voices of color is always preferable to just the one. Finally, like something else, but tone policing is something that we haven't really touched on here. But it's an ever-present danger for feminists of color, especially black women. Many times, even within groups of like ethnicity, black women who speak up are portrayed as angry or hostile, and attempts are made to silence us if we fall out of step with the group in any way. I'm actually experiencing that right as we speak. Some of you have read my latest blog. It's been an interesting day already, but it can be a challenge to continue to stand up for yourself and stand up for other women when it feels as though you're being pushed on all sides, and that's within group and without group. And that's from people who may or may not have ulterior motives on your best interest at heart. And finally, as a challenge that has slightly been touched on, I'd like to explore more, is there is a targeting sometimes of women within the secular movement. And being a secular woman of color and a feminist, and, all these extra things that are on top, a lot of times we can be targeted for that. Since the blog post that I mentioned, I've had women email me or message me on Facebook or kind of reach out and say, first of all, I'm not surprised, which was interesting because I was. I've only been in this movement for about 2 years, so just as a background for those who haven't read it, basically I had safety issues about someone who was coming into the group, I feel as though those issues were dismissed and not taken seriously. And when I brought that to light, it was, I don't think it was handled very nicely or very professionally, even to the point of, there are two women in the room and a leader saying, hey, what do you think about this? You're a woman. Would you be scared too? Don't do that. Ever do that. If a woman tells you that she's being targeted, if you see that a woman is being targeted, and in this instance, there was a whole long list of emails, everybody knew I was being targeted. But if you see those things, we need to speak up and we need to protect those people. And that's one of the things that I found very disappointing. And especially when other women came to me and said, this has happened to me, or this other thing has happened to me. There is a targeting in this area that mirrors the community at large. If it happens in the bigger world, it happens in the secular world too. And we need to stop pretending as though we're better than all of that and we're above all of that. So that's one of the main things I wanted to get across today, is to look out for each other, protect these women, all of us. Because, and even romantically, I've heard, women have come to me and said, I spurned this guy's advances and now all of a sudden he's a sociopath. So we've got to look out for each other. And also, as a former educator and mother, I'm very passionate. I'm still a mother, but I'm a former educator. I'm really passionate about the school to prison pipeline. The disproportionate discipline meted out to students of color, primarily Black and Latina, is a major problem across the country. And in trying to build a coalition against such inequality, specifically here in Texas, I gave a talk to the Humanists of Houston meeting about the subject. Many of them had no idea what was going on in Texas alone, much less the nation. But education inequality is most definitely a secular, atheist, and humanist issue, as students shuffled into the prison pipeline can't advance society, often can't reason their way into atheism, and it's our duty to help them to their full potential as citizens. So, as I stated, these issues really are intersectional, and we really need to do a better job as secularists to reach out to the social justice organizations and the social justice issues and become another voice that's calling for change.
The nuns. We've heard a lot about the meteoric rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, that there's a secular wave that is basically affecting a paradigm shift in the United States. Millennials, are a big chunk of these nuns who don't necessarily subscribe to organized religion, maybe spiritual, maybe in the humanist column, maybe in the atheist column. It's an amalgam. When we look at our communities, we're not seeing this meteoric rise of the nuns, particularly among African American and Latina women. So I want to pose a question about that because, Deanna, you talked about your intersectional work, interfaith work, which is really important, and the fact that there is such grave systemic violence within Black churches, Catholic Latino churches, Pentecostal Latino churches, and the list goes on. But still, we have a lot of women of color, progressive, feminist, womanist, radical, who are invested in their church communities, invested in religious organizing, see that as really being the only meaningful leverage when it comes to all of the intersectional community organizing issues that we're talking about. How do we have dialogue across the lines with our sisters, in other words? Because we've got a lot of blowback about that.
I've not really forged a lot of ties with progressive faith organizations, as I mentioned, because I view it as inherently misogynistic. I know my experience is personally of violence and visibility and usage. Usage in the meaning of women are used in the Black church, especially to do all the work while men are in leadership positions. My experiences in that have really turned me off. I've used the term post-traumatic church syndrome, where I seriously avoid going into churches. The last time I was in a church was my stepfather's funeral, and I almost lost it then. Not because, I wasn't happy that he was gone, but he had gone through a long battle with cancer, so I was okay with that. He wasn't suffering anymore, but it was the blatant, just the church and the pastor and the damnation and hellfire and everything. So that being said, when I'm challenged by religious women in my family, I remind them of the biblically sanctioned violence that's in the Bible. And I think more than that, so we can question them, we can say, how can they speak up for themselves when the Bible clearly tells them not to speak, So, personally, I am more along the lines of organizing secular women of color, because I think there's a lot of us that just don't join organizations for the reasons we already mentioned. But I do think it's important to, and I'm beginning to learn this and be better about this, it's important to find common ground where you can do work, where you can actually get things done. So my biggest kind of action is to say, look, I don't believe what you believe, but I believe that we shouldn't be shuffled into school to prison pipeline. I believe that girls shouldn't be, yanked out of chairs in their high schools. We believe this. So if, and like I said, I'm a work in progress on this one. If we can work together for those goals, then I also think that I can be an example. And actually, I see Greta Christina in here the other night, she mentioned one of the best ways we can kind of evangelize, non-evangelism, to our friends and family is by being an example. Guess what? I'm an atheist. Really? She said, you can do that? Yes, you can do it. And my life hasn't fallen apart in the last 4.5 years. I'm still happy. Kids are still alive. We're doing great. And I think as more that we work together on those common goals, and they can see that it is possible. Because a lot of times I'm the only atheist many people in my family know. So it's more, the more that we find the common ground, we see that it's possible, they can kind of move towards that too. Because I did notice that, and I've noticed this recently, a lot of people are in church, they don't really believe it. They just feel like that's the only place they can get those services. Right. So if we can provide those services and provide that conversation and do the work, actually do the work, then there is an alternative and they can come out of that.
Women, the bodies of women of color are always a battleground for these things. It's always this visual representation. And as far as being a Muslim and an ex-Muslim, that sort of really comes to play because, when white men want to be all superior about how great they are, they don't talk about, oh, Islam is discriminatory towards women. They just point at women in hijab. Whatever visual, obvious representation they can find, that's what they're pointing at. And, they'll say things like, oh, hijab should be banned, and no one would ever actually choose to wear hijab. They're not really concerned with the choices that women make. They're concerned with this sort of visual thing that they think is weird or out there. And I realized that my having worn hijab and not wearing hijab now, again, it's one of those things where it's used as a shield or a token sort of thing. And so realizing that we need to take this focus away from dealing with people's anxieties on the backs and on the bodies of women of color and talking more about actual progress in society and building a world where, women actually are allowed to make choices about their appearance. That's part of what tipped me as far as, not being so uncomfortable about working with Muslims. Because, whether you wear hijab or don't wear hijab, if people perceive you as Muslim, you're gonna get some crap for it. To this day, people will ask me, is your family Muslim or American? Which is a problem. It's a problem on a bunch of levels, but that's another thing I get pushed back a lot from atheists. They say, what do you mean Islam's not a race? Well, it isn't, but it's a racialized issue. Well, what does that mean? I said, what that means is when I walk on the street, people say effing Arab, go home, you terrorist. Because I look Muslim, whether, I've been an atheist for 10 years. I've been about as godless as they come. If you want credentials for not being a Muslim anymore, I got them by the foot. But that doesn't matter when you're dealing with these bigots. And so that's very important, I think, to really push back on and say, no, Islam and hatred of Muslims is a racialized issue, even if Islam's a religion, not a race.
We have to exist. We have to show that we exist. And I know we shouldn't have to. We definitely shouldn't have to, but we have to be seen. and we have to be seen authentically, unapologetically. This is who I am, this is what's important to me, and if it's not important to you too, then I need to go find people that it's important to as well. And I think the more that we do that, and the more that we, show up and speak up and say, deal with it, then people are either gonna have to deal with it or they'll move on somewhere else where they're out of our way.
I think a big part of it is de facto versus de jure, especially with reproductive rights. People think that because the law still allows for birth control, abortion, whatever, then everything must be fine. But I think they're forgetting, or they don't understand that this is an access issue as well. That this is an economic and racial, often, access issue. And so that's something I try to emphasize, when they want to say, oh, what's the big deal? It's still legal. I said, well, if you have to drive 300 miles to get a pack of pills that you have to pay, how much money for, and if you do the math on that, that's not feasible for most people. And that's something that I didn't even realize, having been spoiled living in California. I went in there at 18, they gave me the blue card, I got my free pills from Planned Parenthood, la-di-da, it was fine. So I remember thinking, why does anybody in America get pregnant without wanting to? And then I realized, there's 3 Planned Parenthoods in a 20-mile radius for me. And that's just not true for most people. So, exactly. Pushing the understanding of access issues, I think, is utmost in getting them to understand what the problem is.
Oh gosh, when you talk about Planned Parenthood, and so that's a whole other issue too, as far as so I guess recently people have been talking about Margaret Sanger and how Planned Parenthood was, she started as eugenics, right, to wipe out Black people, right? Yeah, so that's a rumor. So that's it's sort of
an exaggeration.
Right, so that was an interesting dynamic as far as, because I've always loved Planned Parenthood. Like, I've always been a huge advocate for Planned Parenthood, but then as a Black feminist, and then reading something about Margaret Sanger, it seemed a little bit like it was contradictory and it was conflicting. Like, how could I support Planned Parenthood when it was based on some woman who tried to wipe out a whole Black race or whatever? I don't know, but when you speak of reproductive rights and how do we push and just make ourselves known and make sure that that we have a voice. I mean, like everybody else has kind of said, to just kind of be in your face, and maybe some more in your face activism. Maybe we need to go a little bit harder than what we're doing. I mean, you have people who can stand outside Planned Parenthood with their little Christ signs, whatever they do out there, but you don't have atheists, standing outside there too, being like, okay, like, this is a safe space. These people are allowed to walk through. So I don't know. So maybe those are some things that we can, talk about and plan.
To be fair, though, there's at least one person here who does clinic escorting that I know of. So there are some few. Yeah.
I'm a member of Planned Parenthood. I have been for a number of years. I've heard this Margaret Sanger stuff for a while, and I had a bigot come up and tell me about it as well. I don't know if you realize this, but a lot of the founders of this country were racist too.
And that's revisionist history. I mean, the issue is that there were so many African American activists and leaders who were supportive of the origins of Planned Parenthood precisely because it was an economic justice issue. It was an issue of trying to redress hyper-segregation and the violence that's inflicted upon the bodies of Black women when they do not have equitable access to reproductive care and to birth control. Another thing that needs to be foregrounded is that, Black women, again, have been at the forefront of reproductive justice activism, pushing back against hyper-religious evangelical propaganda that has been dumped into our community, basically saying that abortion is genocide. So we've had organizations from Georgia, like Sistahs, which some of you may be familiar with, Black Women for Wellness, from California, that have stood up and said that this is, again, toxic, misogynist bullshit that we're not going to allow in our communities. So that's something that we need to be aware of, that there's a long trajectory of Black women's womanist and feminist activism around reproductive justice. And if the white atheists and the white humanists don't get it, as Deanna said, we're out of here. We're founding our own organizations and institutions. And that's why we're having SSJ this weekend.
The highest grossing atheists on YouTube are all the anti-feminists. They have more subscriptions than everybody else. Richard Dawkins, which you mentioned before, just barred from a conference because he shared a video that was openly misogynistic. So how do you speak to that when you talk about getting leaders that are going to be supported?
Well, we need to stop inviting Richard Dawkins to Congress. We're also saying that he's not representative of the secular movement. On top of that,
Exactly.
I mean, it's a very simple answer, but I mean, what NCESS did was, I thought was very bold. I mean, working for an organization, you know, it's tough to make calls like that, you know, because you know that a lot of people still like Richard Dawkins. They, you know, he really helped a lot of people, you know, become atheists and really formulate this thinking. But you have to be clear. I mean, do you stand for feminism or not? And if you invite him, you're not standing for feminism.
Can any of you address like online harassment? I feel like that's really important before the session ends. And I really want to hear, the reason why I don't have an online presence is because I could never handle that. So when I hear about these rape threats, death threats, what do you think, first of all, what do you think we can do to help you? And the second is, what do you think is going on in their psyche when they're threatening you with rape and death? Like, I just can't, I couldn't even imagine being that hateful towards like Donald Trump. I just don't understand their psyche. If you have like an opinion on that or like some thoughts on that.
Well, I think a lot of what's going on is similar to street harassment. They're putting you in your place. They think they see you as an uppity woman, a mouthy bitch, and they want to tell you where you actually belong, which is, you know, I'm gonna get a little graphic here, but you know, like sucking their cock, basically. They're saying shut your mouth or open your mouth, but don't talk. Because that's what you're good for, that's what you exist for. They're trying to sort of posture in this very this way that is part of toxic masculinity. It's essentially saying this is where you belong. But also just, you know, be aware. Be aware of it. And people make a big show of being shocked by it, but that I think doesn't necessarily help. Because it's not shocking for me. You know, I'm gonna get some whiny, horrible thing. And also not necessarily, this is one thing that I see a lot, I'm trying not to take up all the time, but this is one thing I see a lot in the secular atheist movement, where people who block and are very careful and filtered with how they participate online are vilified and demonized. Oh, you're just living in an echo chamber. Oh, you're just shutting out dissent. Not realizing that, okay, maybe a few good faith people were blocked or knocked out of the discussion unfairly, but the fact is for every one of those, there's 100 who aren't in good faith. And that we have to do self-care and be careful to not exhaust ourselves on these pieces of crap who want to harass us. So yeah, defend people who block, defend people who take care of themselves, rather than go with this whole party line of, oh, they're just against free speech or they just want to live in an echo chamber.
You've got to find actual people of color, actual feminists of color, actual, you know, people who have gone through it, who know about it, who have, you know, lived it, studied it their whole lives. You've got to find those people and say, look, this is what we want to do, we want to help, how can we help? Because I can't imagine just a room of people that have no idea what they're talking about being effective. And that's just me. So.
I think that's kind of the question though, is how do we find those people?
You come here, right, yeah, well, right, to speak to that, kind of, you need to find someone who wants to do both, because I'm sure I could go into a CFI meeting and say I want to be the whatever person, diverse person, I don't know, but I'm still going to have secular sisters. Like, there's still, you know, there's still going to be both. I don't know, but there's just, I guess there's just not too many of us. There's not enough of us to go around.
And there's more, you know, I'm not saying it's easy, but there's definitely more of us that are out because we don't see each other.
Right.
You know, when I was first going through deconversion, I was online and I was Googling Black atheists. I didn't know that it, you know, what I'm going through, what I'm thinking about, that other people who look like me had experienced that. You know, so we're out there, we're there. You just, you know, you might have to dig a little deeper, you might have to come to conferences like this, you might, especially if you're in a metropolitan city like Houston, you know, look at those organizations, look and talk to people, you know, and definitely not saying it's gonna be easy, but you've got to have that representation there.
And also make it appealing. Unfortunately, with a lot of these groups, there's very much a free speech, Wild West, everything goes environment. And when you have an environment where harassment is tolerated as free speech, guess who you're gonna drive out? So it's a free and safe space for a harasser, but not for anybody who might be harassed by them. So you have to sort of make, and it sounds obvious, but you have to make those things explicit. You have to explicitly say, you know, we have policies for this, we will deal with these things if they come up, rather than just assume everybody's nice, because the same person who will be nice to you as a white person or a man or both won't necessarily be as nice to the woman of color who walks in.
Right.
Even though you think he's the nicest guy on the planet. I may be better about this a little bit.
And just to get back to AJ's point, Deanna's point about the vast divide that separates, you know, white feminism from black feminism, we didn't get to talk about the power and the problematic dynamic of respectability politics. But that is one of the huge anchors for African American women, Latina women, Asian working class women, immigrant women, being so ensconced in religious structures. And again, viewing religious structures as, you know, the only viable means for leverage, for visibility, for voice, for agency, in other words. So we're really looking at, you know, how can we forge self-determination that is humanistic, that is encompassing of, you know, all of our complexities and all of our commitment to lifting up intersectional struggle, and that's going to continue to be the conversation for the course of the weekend. Thank you so much for coming.